It might be said that I love the Cleveland Browns. While I am not a fan of the Cleveland Browns in any way, shape, or form, I cannot lie. Talking about them is very good for the channel. The Cleveland Browns seem to supply me with a never ending stream of consistent content over the past several years, to which I thank them. So you could say maybe I love to hate on them. And there ultimately is a reason why they are called by me the Cleveland Skidmarks, because they are the brown stain of brown stains of NFL organizations. They just are. They are a mess, they are a train wreck, and frankly, they have been ever since they came back into being in the 1999 season. So it really shouldn't be all that much of a surprise that 2016 has been yet another disastrous season for the Cleveland Browns, another lost season for the Cleveland Browns, another season where they're staring down a top draft pick. And in this particular case, unless they find a Cleveland way to screw it all up, the Browns, after Sunday, are going to own the number one pick in the 2017 NFL Draft. And they've earned it. And surely there are going to be those that say, even though they knew the Browns were going to be bad, and the Browns have been really bad, they've been terrible, they're 1-14 as it stands right now, that Hugh Jackson already has proven himself to not be the guy, and he should be fired. And I guess in theory there's an argument to be made. You look, frankly, the team got worse, not better in 2016. You look for growth and you look for progress when you bring in a new guy in a new regime in year one, and it flat out hasn't been there. You can talk about some of the reasons why that may have been, but some of that does have to reflect upon the coaching staff and the guy that assembled the coaching staff, the head coach. I mean, this team got worse. If we could talk about the Browns, this and that and everything else, staring down top 5 and top 10 picks almost every year of existence, but they're in a position right now to once again have the number 1 overall pick. So they took a step backward this year. You can also point to part of the reason this team ended up in this predicament was the fact that Hugh Jackson had a hard-on for RG&E for reasons that are unbeknownst to me and anybody that watches football that has a brain. Not only did he tie his team's ultimate success and failures to RG&E, and again, people in this area of the country, the DMV area, call him RG&E for a reason. Hugh Jackson thought he was going to be some great reclamation project for him. And damn the history that suggests that championship teams more often than not are built around a quarterback that you draft and develop, in particular in the first 3 to 4 rounds of the draft. I'm going to take somebody else's reject that got replaced by a 4th round pick quarterback from that same draft class, and I'm going to try and get something out of him. And what did you get? Very few games, a lot of games missed due to, imagine that, RG&E getting hurt again, and the Browns staring down the barrel of the number 1 overall pick in the 2017 draft. Furthermore, what makes this even more egregious is the fact that they were sitting there at number 2. They had the opportunity to take Carson Wentz, and instead decided that we're going to play the analytics game and we're going to trade that position and get additional picks in future drafts. Not that this organization knows what the hell they're doing in the draft anyways. Doesn't matter whether you have 1 pick or 20. If you can't get it right, you're not going to get it right. But if you take Carson Wentz, maybe at least get 1 pick right. But of course, instead of having that potential franchise quarterback of the future already in the wings, 1 year into Hugh Jackson's system and getting ready for 2017, you have RG&E, Josh McCown, Cody Kessler, and a bunch of crap at the quarterback position, a 1-14 team that is still looking for its young franchise quarterback. 8 losses by 14 or more points. I mean, there's a case to be made that Hugh Jackson should be fired. But the Browns can't do that. They can't fire Hugh Jackson. First and foremost, when you look at the Cleveland Browns, they've had a brutal schedule this year. And just think of some of the teams. Now, not all of them are great teams, but there are a lot of good or solid or even average teams. There are other teams with schedules that are far less brutal than what the Browns had this year. They had to play Baltimore twice. They had to play Pittsburgh twice. They had to play Miami, playoff team. Washington, possible playoff team. New England, we know what New England is. Tennessee, who was in the playoff mix until this past weekend. Dallas, the Giants, another playoff team. Obviously, Dallas, the best team in the NFC right now. And even Buffalo, a 500 type team. They had a really tough schedule. And furthermore, when you look at that tough schedule and you look at the Cleveland Browns and the way they were constructed, how much better would the 2016 Cleveland Browns have been with anybody else? I mean, let's be honest. You put Bill Belichick in that organization, how many games does he really, truly win with this team? 4? 5? 6 if you want to be incredibly generous? Nobody's taken this Cleveland Browns roster the way it's constructed right now to the playoffs. And a lot of coaches would have done the exact same thing in terms of performance that Hugh Jackson did in 2016 with the Cleveland Browns. I mean, they're bad. Everybody knew they were going to be bad. So you had to know, regardless of what they would have done in the draft, even if they took Carson Wentz, this is still a shitty team. You could have more pieces in place for the future potentially, but it's still a shitty team, and they were going to have a shitty season. This was the true bottoming out of the Browns organization if there ever had been a time. It's right here, right now. And it was coming, and it was going to happen. But you look at it, you see some positive strides. Isaiah Crowell had an adequate season. Not somebody I'd want as my long-term starter, but Hugh Jackson got something decent out of him. Terrell Pryor has had a career renaissance in Cleveland. Now staring down the barrel of getting himself paid very handsomely in the offseason. That at least has to somewhat be credited to Hugh Jackson and how the offense utilized him, even with the revolving door at the quarterback position. And even when you look at the revolving door at the quarterback position, Cody Kessler was not very good, but he wasn't completely terrible. I mean, I think he had 6 touchdown passes, 2 interceptions. He's kind of a noodle arm, and he's not a guy you're ever going to win big-time games with. But for what they had, they got something out of him. And that, again, to me, speaks to the coaching staff. And you're looking at a team that everybody knows they suck, including the players. They know they're going to have a shitty season. They're in the midst of the shitty season, but they haven't quit. They didn't give up. They kept fighting for themselves, for their coach, regardless of the suckage. And you can see the emotion that they had when they beat the Chargers this past weekend. It really meant something to them. Now, maybe it just meant something to them because they didn't want to finish 0-16, but it still meant something to them. And there could be other locker rooms that you go into, like the Jets or who have you, that if they were staring at 0-16 season, they might not care. Where the hose at? They still cared. And you could tell there's a bond and a connection with Hugh Jackson. These guys respect him. These guys want to fight for him. They want to play for him. And while they should want to do that as professionals, as football players, that's not a guarantee that they're going to be able to do that or want to do that. Jackson's got him. He's got them motivated, even if they're not very good. But beyond all else, you fire Hugh Jackson, you're just doing the same old business as usual for the Cleveland Browns. You cannot be successful changing head coaches and general managers every 2 or 3 years. Since the Browns came back into the league in 1999, they've had now 9 head coaches. Why, after one season that you knew was going to be terrible, if you had any brains at all, would you want to bring in a 10th head coach and possibly a new front office again? You're never going to get anywhere with that. There is a significant need in Cleveland for, as much as anything else, continuity, consistency in terms of the message, the direction, the approach, the philosophy. And that's the one thing they've ever had. When you're in a division where the Ravens have had Ozzie Newsome as their general manager since the mid-1990s, and John Harbaugh is their head coach since 2008. No, the Ravens, of course, the old Cleveland Browns. You look at Harbaugh, even his time since 2008. They made the playoffs several times. They were a borderline playoff team this year, and they've got a Super Bowl ring. You look at the Pittsburgh Steelers in the same division. Had 3 head coaches since 1969. Imagine that continuity. 8 Super Bowl appearances since that time started. 6 Super Bowl championships. Mike Tomlin, who's been there since, 2007? He's got a ring and another Super Bowl appearance. Even the Cincinnati Bengals, even though it's time for Marvin Lewis to go, he's been there 14 seasons. The Bengals have made the playoffs 7 times. And the Bengals in the 90s were the Bungles like the Browns are the Skidmarks of this generation of the NFL. And yet the Cleveland Browns consistently, repeatedly make the same damn mistakes. They fire general managers and team presidents every 2 years. They fire head coaches every 2 years. And they just keep spinning the wheels and they never get anywhere. Anywhere. And we talk about the history of head coaches in the NFL. You know, you don't like to see that your team regresses or has a worse record in the first year of a new head coach, but it happens. Or they don't get any better. I think back to the Dallas Cowboys. Landry's last year, they ended up winning, I guess you would say, the number one overall pick in '89. They took Aikman, brought in Jimmy Johnson. They took Troy Aikman. And they proceeded to go 1-15 that season. And the one victory they got was without Troy Aikman as their starting quarterback. So they got the number one pick again in 1990. But wouldn't you know, Jerry Jones stuck with Jimmy Johnson, allowed Jimmy Johnson the time to put into place what Jimmy Johnson was trying to do, a Herschel Walker trade here and there, a couple of other astute draftings such as Emmitt Smith in 1990, already having Irvin in place from the first round in '88. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know, Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones ultimately built a team that won 2 Super Bowls with Jimmy, and then another one a couple years later with Barry Switzer. 3 Super Bowl titles in a 4-year span. Imagine if Jerry Jones utilized a Cleveland Browns type of approach and said after the 1989 season where they went 1-15 and Aikman looked like a complete mess and disaster, we're going to go ahead and change football coaches. The Cowboys would potentially be staring down the barrel of having one of the longest Super Bowl droughts in the NFL. You know, you go way back in the day to Chuck Noll. You know, even when he came in '69, drafted Mean Joe Green out of, I think it was North Texas. You know, the fact is that team was still terrible in that 1969 season, got the number one overall pick, and took Terry Bradshaw in 1970. Sometimes when things are that bad, and believe me, for the Browns, it's that bad. It takes time. It absolutely takes time. So as far as I'm concerned, even if the Browns aren't much better in 2017, they have to stay the course, if for no other reason, with Hugh Jackson than to sit there and stub the tide of the ways of the past. They have to conduct themselves in a different way. Take a look at everything you've done as a Browns organization in 1999 and try to do something different. That's what has to happen here. Hugh Jackson has to be given a fair shake. He has to be given a chance. And one season with that horrible-ass roster and no long-term answer at quarterback, even if he is partially to blame for that, that's not enough time. We shouldn't be talking about Hugh Jackson's job for another 2, 3 full seasons because the Browns are that bad. And frankly, if you're the Cleveland Browns and the fan base and the organization, the hell do you have to lose by keeping Hugh Jackson as your coach, other than more football games that you'd probably lose with the next bum that you would hire to lead the ship any damn ways? Nah. There are coaches that deserve to be fired, no question about it. Hugh Jackson's not one of them. Because I guarantee you there is nobody, even the greatest of all time, Bill Belichick, that would make this current Browns roster a winning football team. And there are several other coaches in the league that would do no better than the 1-14 Hugh Jackson has done this year. Hugh Jackson deserves to stay. He deserves more time because that's the only way the Browns are ever going to fix this damn thing.